Hello, fourth graders. I'm excited to be back after break, and we're going to get started this week on a new writing unit. So far, you have written a personal narrative, and then you wrote an informational report. Now we're moving on to write a fictional story. These are the most fun for me to write and to grade are the fictional stories. Um, so let's just jump right in here and get started for this week. What does fiction mean? A fictional story is a story that did not actually happen. So, how is a fictional story different than a personal narrative? A personal narrative is a true story that happened to you. A fictional story is a story that you made up with made up characters. Realistic or unrealistic? A fictional story can be realistic, a story that could have happened. A fictional story can also be unrealistic, which means a story that could not have happened. So, in review here, what is a fictional narrative? It is a story that did not happen. It can be realistic or unrealistic. So, let's do a few task cards here, and you can determine if this would be a fiction or nonfiction. Okay? A story about the time I stayed overnight at my best friend's house. This is nonfiction because this is a true story. What about a report about the making of the American flag? Nonfiction because this would be a true informational report. What about a recipe for mom's famous banana bread? Nonfiction because this is a real recipe. What about a story about a bee that is allergic to pollen? This would be fiction because it would be a made up story. Now, the first step we have to do when planning our fictional narrative is to start with characters. We have to determine what characters our story will be about. Before we pick characters, we must decide if our characters will be realistic or non realistic. Okay, will your story be about people like us? Or will your story have unicorns and dragons or talking animals? You also need to determine your main character. So once you decide the type of characters, you will need to decide who the main character will be. What is their name? What do they look like? What do they act like? And then stories are not usually about just one person. They're usually secondary characters that know the main character and help to tell the story. Some might be friends and some might be enemies. So, first, you will be filling out a chart similar to this on this week's assignment. You need to determine if you want to write a realistic fiction story or an unrealistic fiction story. Either one is okay. And then you're going to fill out the boxes about your characters. The first box would be about your main character. Are they human, an animal, or something else? What is their name and age? What do they look like? And what are their interests and character traits? Lots of questions there, so don't just put their name. Be sure to answer all those questions. The more information you give for your character, the easier your story will be to write. Here is an example written in orange. Sarah is a 10-year-old girl who is very shy, but loves to draw and paint. She just moved into a new home. The next step is to determine those secondary characters. And again, you're going to want to give a lot of information about them. Here are some examples. Jessica is Sarah's neighbor who also loves to draw and paint. Sarah's mom is always busy taking care of her baby brother and cleaning up after him, and a large raven who visits Sarah in her treehouse. Okay. Now, the next step, we're going to determine our setting. The setting is where and when the story takes place. Our story might have scenes in more than one place and time, but let's start by planning the setting of the majority of our story. We want to close our eye and brainstorm as many details as possible to describe our setting. You're going to be filling out a chart similar to this for this week's assignment. You're going to determine where your story takes place, the majority, remember, when it takes place, and if you want to do an additional scene setting, like your scene's going to change, it's going to move to a different setting, you'll write the information there. Here's an example. Sarah's treehouse. It is empty and lonely with a rug, one camping chair, and four windows on each wall. Do you notice the detail that's written there? It doesn't say it took place in a treehouse. No, it tells us we can actually picture that treehouse. This is where you can actually close your eyes and picture it. The more you describe and the more you fill out here, the better and easier it will be to write your story. Let's move on here. When it takes place, a span of several days in the afternoons during the summer. And an additional scene setting would be Sarah's home. It is a two-story home painted blue in the middle of a cul-de-sac that Sarah's family just moved into. There are boxes still sitting in corners, waiting to be unpacked, and rooms empty and bare without furniture. Okay, what are your next steps? You will be opening up your week 19 assignment and you will be filling out these charts with the information for your story that you will be writing. And remember, we'll be working on this writing over several weeks.